With the release of the first and more than likely only DLC set to release for Resident Evil Village on October 28th, 2022, and with the announced release of the RE4 remake right around the corner in March of 2023, I thought now would be a good time to give my opinion of Resident Evil Village and maybe a few thoughts of the Resident Evil franchise in general. I'm a huge fan of the Resident Evil series. I can still remember a friend bringing his PlayStation over to my house and being blown away by how great the PS1 really was. I have played games for a long time. I started out playing Atari, Coleco, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and Dreamcast up until that point. And Dreamcast is actually a good console for the time, but that's for another video. I will never forget, however, seeing a little known game he owned named Resident Evil. I was absolutely blown away. It was the first time I had seen a game ever with a movie style intro and a game with such an immersive story accompanied by unprecedented gameplay for the time. There are a lot of great games that I've been fortunate enough to play throughout my life, but nothing is really equal playing RE1 for the first time, Tomb Raider for the first time, Metal Gear Solid for the first time, just to name a few. Now looking back, the graphics were not as great as I remembered, and the acting, well, let's just say it's not going to win any Oscars or anything even remotely close. But it is still to this day amazing for me and will always hold a special place in my heart.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris is...
What is it?
Maybe it's Chris. Now, Jill, can you go?
I'm going with you. Chris is our old partner, you know.
Okay, let me handle this.
Resident Evil Village released on May 2nd, 2021, and I was very excited to play the next game in the RE universe. My first impressions were of amazement of how beautiful the game really was. The RE engine is a great engine that produces some of the most realistic graphics to date, especially when it comes to photorealism of objects. Character models are for the most part great as well, but there are some exceptions, particularly in some of the faces of the characters. But I don't feel like that's something that'll last throughout the entire lifespan of the RE engine. I feel like that maybe they can fix that up a little bit. Before we start with the review, let's do a quick story summary. Now, disclaimers, there are spoilers for the entire game. If you don't want to know about the game, then obviously click off. There are spoilers for both RE7 and RE Village in this summary, so now's your chance to click off before you spoil it for yourself. Resident Evil Village features the return of protagonist Ethan Winters after he was introduced in Resident Evil 7. Also returning is Ethan's wife, Mia Winters.
Thank God I found you. It's me. It's Ethan.
Ethan? Ethan?
Are you alright?
You shouldn't be here.
We are also introduced for the first time Rose Winters, who is Ethan and Mia's daughter. The story begins 2 years after the events of Resident Evil 7 in Dolby, Louisiana, where Ethan, believing his wife was more than likely dead, received an email from Mia telling him that she was in Dolby and to come get her.
She's not dead. She's alive. She's back.
With no other information and not even knowing if it was real or not, Ethan, 3 years later, went to go see if it was, in fact, Mia.
Maybe it's a prank. She wants me to come and get her.
Where is she?
Dolby, Louisiana.
Dude, it's been 3 years.
I know, but what if it is her? I have to find out what happened.
And throughout RE7, Ethan uncovers that Mia had been hiding a secret from him, and he faces off against the hillbillies from hell, Jack, who is one of my personal favorite villains, not just in RE, but in all video games, Marguerite and Lucas Baker, known as the Baker family. And those are the three main bosses that we go up against in RE7, with the exclusion, obviously, of the main boss, Evelyn, if you actually consider that a boss, which could be, I guess, for another video.
Shit, he's not eating it, Jack! He's not eating it!
Shut the hell up, Marguerite!
They said for him!
Get the hell out of here!
You're a son of a bitch!
RE Village begins with a great cutscene of Mia telling a pretty creepy story, which we find out later is actually a summary of what Ethan is going to go through in this game.
But the forest greeted them with a dark, cold silence, the bushes empty. Yet determined to find the berries, the rascal broke free from Mother's grasp and vanished into the trees. Mother's worried cries faded fast as the girl ran on, over vine and under branch, and into the forest deep. Feeling strange eyes upon her, the girl recalled Mother's scary bedtime tales, and her throat became bone dry. Then the Bat Lord appeared. He greeted her warmly and bit his own wing. "Come, child, quench your thirst," he said. So she drank the thick, dark blood and smiled with joy.
We also, for the first time, get to see Rosemary Winters, and she will be part of the DLC that's coming up. That's going to be released on October 28th in what's called Shadows of Rose, and we're going to actually get to play her 16 years later and try to, I guess, from what I can tell from the trailers, is try to maybe get rid of her powers so she can just be a normal person. But we'll talk more about that a little later.
Because she doesn't understand it. Thank God.
After the creepy bedtime story, we're given some information about what the Winters have been up to since Dalby. They have relocated to Europe, and Ethan has undergone some training through Chris Redfield after meeting him and learning about bioweapons in the end of RE7.
Go cautiously take your daughter to bed.
You really have to stop worrying.
It's just finding you in Louisiana, the pregnancy, Chris moving us here, military training, it all happened so fast, you know?
Well, at least we're all together.
During the dinner, Ethan watches his wife Mia get gunned down in their kitchen, and we learn it is Chris who surprisingly is responsible.
It happened so long ago. I don't understand why you are so...
Mia, get down! Mia! Mia, oh God! Chris? What the hell?
Sorry, Ethan.
No! What? Why? All clear. Rose? What the hell are you doing with my daughter?
Ethan and Rose are being taken by Chris and his soldiers, and Ethan is knocked out when he tries to stop them from taking Rose, and wakes up in a wrecked van in a snowy forest. The game then continues as Ethan, trying to find his daughter, ends up in a village that turns out to be a bioweapon breeding ground. In Resident Evil 7, Ethan had an unlikely ally in Chloe as she gives him information about what happened to the Bakers, what happened to Mia, and tells us what we can do to maybe cure Mia.
You did good, Ethan.
Zoe, right? And what the fuck are these?
Shut up and listen if you want to stay alive. You gotta get out of that house. There might be a way out through the main hall.
All right.
Oh, and that thing on your wrist is a codex. Don't lose it. It's important.
In Village, we are given another ally named the Duke.
I've been waiting for you, Mr. Winters.
How do you know my name?
Anyone who is anyone has heard of the likes of you. A hero searching for his daughter. Though I must say, that castle arouses suspicion.
Yeah, and so do you.
I am but a humble merchant.
Here?
Oh, forgive my manners. Call me the Duke.
Who not only tells us what's going on, but sells us merchandise and weapons to help us throughout the game.
Anything you... Oh, yes.
We then search the village for Rose and have to defeat the 4 lords of the village to get back flasks that apparently contain Rose's essence. We also learned that the village has ties to Oswald Spencer and the Umbrella Corporation. Also that, while being different, it is similar to the mold that we went against in RE7. After defeating the 4 lords and their creator, Mother Miranda, we finally do get to get our daughter back, but Ethan pays the ultimate price in losing his life. That is just a really quick recap of the story. Obviously, there's a lot more involved, but I just kind of wanted to give a little quick overview before the review, which is coming up right now. Resident Evil Village is a great game overall. If you have played previous RE games, then you know the game has gone through many phases. RE1 was a good survival horror game that required you to solve many puzzles, conserve resources, and defeat a variety of different enemies. You found out more of the story as you went along and found out that there was a conspiracy by the Umbrella Corporation to create bioweapons that they could sell to governments for war. It is a story of death and betrayal. RE2 followed the same formula as RE1 in a different setting. RE3 was much of the same, but all 3 of them were really great games. RE4 was, I guess, kind of a change to the RE survival horror genre. While still having some aspects of survival horror, it added more action to the game and also took away, there was still resource management and still inventory management, but it took away the boxes that were prominent in the first 3, to where you had to only take certain inventory items with you. In RE4, similar to Village, you just had a set inventory and you had to manage it throughout the game, which I don't think is actually a bad thing, to be honest. I do like the way the boxes were and I thought it was cool, but it's more realistic, I feel like, just to have a set inventory and you got to manage that throughout the game. Now, RE4 was a good game and is widely considered to be the apex of the Resident Evil series. A lot of people consider RE4 to be maybe the best game, and it also introduced the game to a lot of people who had not played it prior to it being released. So it was one of their best selling games, which leads us to RE5 and RE6. They were actually better selling, which is kind of surprising to me because it went in a different direction. It started getting into like the shooter looter action game market, and I wasn't looking for that. I wanted survival horror. I don't mind a little bit of action, but it was just a little over the top for me. It wasn't my type of game. Not necessarily saying that they're bad games for somebody who might like them. I just didn't like them all that much. RE7 introduced the first-person camera, and while I'm not a huge fan of first-person games in general, it definitely fit with the horror aspects as RE7 returned to its roots to have more of a survival horror game. And I personally think RE7 is a pretty good game. There are some aspects of it that I feel like could be changed, but this is not necessarily an RE7 review. And now this brings us to Village. And Village, while being a continuance of RE7, kind of went back to the RE4 formula of having some aspects of survival horror, but with an action emphasis as well. And it still worked for me. I did enjoy the changes that were made. But with that being said, I hope it doesn't lead Capcom to try to go back from RE4 to RE5 to RE6. I hope they just stick to what has been working good over these past 2 games. But it makes sense that it would kind of go back to the RE4 formula, considering now that we know that RE4 Remake is coming out, and both of them games were likely being developed at the same time, so they probably drew on inspiration from RE4 a little bit. Now, with all that being said, this game isn't free of issues. It has a few problems that, while to me aren't deal breakers overall, they do bear some consideration and discussion. What determines whether a game is good or bad? There are a few criteria that I personally consider, and graphics are a big factor for me, But just being graphically stunning is nothing if there isn't more. Immersion is really important. Game length is very important as well. It doesn't have to be 100 hours of story, but I do like a longer game if, and this is a big if, it also entertains me. The problem with length is that it can get repetitive really fast. So in order for a longer game to work for me, then it also has to keep me on my toes. That, I think, is probably one of the harder things about developing game stories, is trying to keep it fresh throughout the entire game, particularly when you're trying to make a game that is of a considerable length. But to me, I kind of just boil it down to value. Is it worth the money? Is it worth my time? And would I do it all over again if I could? So what is the difference between value and cost? For me, the price of a game isn't the most important factor when determining if it is worth it or not. I don't mind paying for quality games, or anything else for that matter, but I look for value. What do I get for my money and my time? Was it worth the hours that I invested in the game? Resident Evil games have never been very long games, but they added value by replayability. And if you explore everything there is in Village, and it's your first time going through, then typically in a game, you'll spend between 6 to 10 hours to complete it. I spent closer to the lower end here, wrapping up in about 5.5 hours. That's also including cutscenes and the slow 5-minute walk up the snowy hill that you have to repeat every time you play the game. But the first time, that's okay for me. But after your first playthrough and you get a general idea of where items are, what items are necessary, and have a general idea of how to take the enemies on, then this game can be beat really quickly in a couple of hours or so. In previous RE games, they added replayability by giving us different characters we could choose. For example, in RE1, we had Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, which would give us 2 different experiences for the same game. And you could also change the difficulty on both of those characters to make the runs more challenging. RE2, we had Leon Kennedy, Story A, Story B, along with Claire Redfield, Story A, Story B, which gave us 2 slightly different playthroughs for each character. And what I really enjoyed about the RE2 original, because the RE2 remake kind of botched it, I feel like, when it came to the whole A and B scenario, because in the original you had Leon A, Claire A, and then which if you pick the opposite, then you would play her story or his story to where they're on the other side of the car and they have to go through a different way to get into the station and, you know, find key items in different ways and stuff like that. And also in the original, if you would take certain items, they wouldn't be there for the other person. So you kind of had to learn as you went along, which gave it a lot of replayability. But in the remake, there still was a lot of replayability as well. And also gave you a chance to change the difficulty if you wanted a more challenging run. Now, once we get to RE3, the original RE3 that is, it takes a different approach that gives us a choice of actions. And while those actions didn't do a whole lot, we do have to take into account the time that the game was made and can at least appreciate the effort. In the RE3 remake, they took that out completely and only offered difficulty as a means of replayability, which I kind of feel like was a detriment to that game. It could have been really great, like the RE2 remake was really great. But let's skip ahead and take, for example, the previous installment of Resident Evil 7. RE7 doesn't give us an option to play through different characters' experiences, so it had to add replayability, and there are different difficulties that you can choose to achieve the replayability. In RE7, they offered Easy, Normal, and Madhouse, so 3 difficulties. And Easy and Normal were pretty much the same, with enemies being a little bit more difficult. In Normal, or maybe Standard, it could have been called Standard, I'm not 100% sure, but you get the gist. Madhouse, however, was the hardest difficulty, and it was a very different experience. You had items in different places, more items, different things. Enemies were harder. Enemy locations were different. They added enemies, and the boss fights were noticeably tougher as well. Also, ammo was significantly reduced, so it added some good replayability. Now, when we compare these aspects of replayability to Village, what do they give you? In Village, you're going to get a choice between easy, standard, hard, and Village of Shadows difficulty. What is the difference between them? Essentially, the higher you raise the difficulty, the enemies just become bullet sponges. They become faster, and they become more aggressive, and they'll pretty much one-shot you or take you down to 1 hit point every time they hit you. And when I say they become bullet sponges, I mean you can't spend hardly any ammo on any normal enemy throughout the Village of Shadows run. You have to save it for the bosses, and you still might end up short saving it just for the bosses. Now, I don't have a problem, not a single problem, with having to conserve ammo. I think that's a essential part of a good RE game, but within reason. This game, I feel like, is a lazy way to add difficulty, and to me, it's just not fun. It's just artificial difficulty by, like I said, reducing damage, adding a ridiculous amount of HP to enemies. Now, playing Village on hardcore, I feel like is a pretty challenging run, but it's still fun for me. Playing on Village of Shadows difficulty is not fun at all. And while you can argue that Village of Shadows difficulty is supposed to be played in New Game Plus with more powerful weapons, your ammo from the last game, currency, etc., I don't enjoy playing New Game Plus as much as some other people might. I want to play the game on the hardest setting from scratch and try to work my way through. I find that more challenging. As long as, like I said, I'm challenged in a fun way. Now, if you're just looking for in-game challenges, you can beat Village of Shadows with infinite ammo and New Game Plus or whatever, and you'll still get the achievement for it. Now, I'm not opposed to playing New Game Plus, but it's not a feature I typically care much about in games. I will play some New Game Plus runs, obviously, but I have more fun playing it from scratch, like I said. But as you go up in difficulty, all key items, all items are in the exact same spot. All enemies are in the exact same spot. Everything is the same, just faster bullet sponges. Now, when this game was released, I paid $60 US dollars for it. And even with some replayability, $60 for a 6-hour game is not very good at all. And you could play this game 2 or 3 times, get all the achievements in under 20 hours easily. There's also a Mercenaries mode, which surprisingly I did like. And I only played it to try to get all of the Steam achievements and in-game achievements, but ended up actually enjoying it more than I thought I would. But still, with all that said, for $60, you should be getting a lot more gameplay than what we did. They've recently lowered the price before the release of the DLC to $40, which I feel like was probably a good price for this game, brand new. While this is a different style game than, some of your other AAA games that you get, most of the other games you get, it's going to take you dozens of hours for your first playthrough just to get through the game, and you get that for the same price that you got for Resident Evil Village. For me to feel like I'm getting good value for this game, I would say the story should take about 20 to 25 hours, and that's with replayability, to maximize my value, but it isn't a must-have, as games can get away with less and have other factors that raise the game to be a great one for me. No Resident Evil game meets that time threshold that I just mentioned, but they're still great games for me. Why? Because of replayability, whether it be new characters to play, more of a challenge, new aspects of the story, and a refreshing experience. But I feel like times are changing with modern games being a lot longer, with good stories, great graphics, and being more immersive. And with other RE games, not all RE games, but with other RE games, I have wanted to play through them multiple times. Different characters, different stories, different items, locations, more of a challenge, not just bullet sponges, etc. And I did play this game quite a bit, but I am a pretty die-hard, hardcore Resident Evil fan, and I wanted to understand all the lore, explore everything, and wanted to get all achievements. Otherwise, I would have been done completely with this game after about 15 hours or so. One change that I do like and appreciate between RE7 and Village is that you can now skip the cutscenes, which anybody who has played Resident Evil 7 a couple times, you know those cutscenes get pretty annoying pretty fast to have to sit through them every time.
Hey, baby. I just wanted to send a quick hello and I love you. Oh, good news. I'm gonna be coming home soon. Yay!
While like I said, I enjoy spending time playing a game, I don't enjoy spending my time just watching the same things over and over again with no change. The story, while being good for the most part, has way too many holes in it for me. There are a number of inconsistencies and plot holes that kind of take away from the story for me. Resident Evil game stories are never perfect, but to me they're still enjoyable. This one for me was maybe more disappointing when it came to the story, since maybe RE5 or RE6. This game starts off on a high note. You begin with amazing graphics, a cool story, cool cutscene to start the game with. You start off with shock, thinking, what the hell happened to Chris and why is he doing this? Which leads to a pretty bizarre plot line. Mia was taken and replaced by Mother Miranda. But why? Why not just take Rosemary if you wanted her and just kill Ethan and Mia? Why leave them alive to stop you? You're a bioweapon that can kill someone in the blink of an eye, so why even try to go through the whole charade of pretending that you're Mia to trick Ethan? Ethan's a nobody, a nothing. You snap his neck, it's over. So I don't understand that. And why would Chris just show up and just kill fake Mia without telling Ethan anything? Chris has been fighting bioweapons for 20 years at this point, and you would think that he would know by now that a few bullets isn't going to stop someone as powerful as Miranda. After fake Mia was dead, he could have simply told Ethan what was happening, grab Rose, and let's get out of here, and Ethan would have complied, I'm sure, without any type of issue whatsoever. And you can argue, which Chris says in the story, that he didn't want Ethan to interfere. But if Ethan has Rose, you take him to a safe location, Ethan is not going to leave his daughter to go interfere. He's going to try to trust you. He knows you guys are professionals. He knows what you guys are going to do. He's going to trust you to help try to get his wife back. And even if he wanted to help, he's been training for 2 years, as the story told us. So he could have been an asset to Chris as long as he was in control, which I believe Chris could have probably kept him in control. And if you didn't want him to interfere, then just lock him up with Rose. I mean, he may be upset about it, but lock him up until it's over with, and at least he has his daughter. And, you know, it's not Chris's fault. It's not Ethan's fault. It's nobody's fault that Miranda did this. So I don't think Ethan would have been too upset after it was all said and done. I mean, he was already kidnapping them, so why not just go full out and lock them up? I don't know. But next, why did Mother Miranda split Rose in 4 different parts and then give them to the other lords if it was so important? If she needed to do the ceremony, why did she need to split her up first? Because when you come back, you just see that Rose comes back. You don't even see the flash after you use them to get across, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, if they would have added something like to where she needed Ethan to kill the 4 lords to help with the ceremony, and then for Ethan to die, then it could have maybe worked, but that wasn't really the case at all. Miranda does allude to Ethan serving a purpose by getting rid of her false children, but this was all sprung on her by Chris's actions, by taking her out, taking Rose, and what wasn't really planned from the get-go, because you ended up in this village supposedly by chance, or close to this village by chance, by the van being wrecked, and none of this was really planned. Not that you really know about. Maybe Miranda is just some super duper mastermind that did plan all this, but you don't really get that information. Ethan then has to collect all the 4 parts of Rose to bring her back. But then, after you go through all of this, you get the 4 flasks, you got your daughter, or the essence of your daughter. Now you have to put them into this Giant's Chalice, which unlocks the chalice. Then you take the chalice and you put it into another spot, and all it does is open up a bridge to Heisenberg. What the hell does Heisenberg have to do with those 4 parts? Heisenberg's not that integral part of the story. He's just another one of Miranda's kids, or creations, I guess you could say, and we have to take him out. And the only reason we have to take him out is because the 4 flasks lead us over there, because he, for some reason, left his flask with the Lycans, to which he really didn't have any ties to, so I don't know why he would leave him with the Lycans. When I first seen Heisenberg, I thought maybe he was kind of like a werewolf or something, which I think would have been pretty cool. You know, he kind of looks like that. But he ended up just having his factory, and he creates, you know, his metal army. So he doesn't really have much to do with the Lycans. So why was his flask over there? I couldn't tell you. And why, once we get his flask and all the other flasks, does it just open up a bridge to get to Heisenberg? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to me at all. So Ethan gets those 4 flasks, puts them in the Giant's Chalice, takes it down there, puts it in there, gets the bridge to come up, and then just leaves the 4 flasks that you just spent your, risk your life to collect. You got all 4 of them. You're supposed to be able to bring your daughter back now. You don't ask any questions to the Duke. The Duke's the one told you that she could be saved. Now you got all 4 parts. You didn't even ask, like, what do I do now? How do I bring her back? No, you just put them in there. Nobody gives you any information, and then the bridge comes up. So, kind of a pretty big, like, what the hell is going on here? Then the question is, why the hell does the flask open up the Giant's Chalice? Like, was the flask there before and they were took out? Rose was put in them and then distributed. And then you get the flask back, you put them back into the chalice, and then the chalice opens up to a bridge to Heisenberg's factory. It's just totally just absurd. That's like, I just don't even understand it at all, not one bit. Now, the Duke, I feel like the Duke's a pretty good character. And I have a whole lot of questions about who the hell the Duke is, but hopefully some of those will be answered in the DLC, because you don't get much information throughout the game, so we'll just wait and see about that. After the intro, you come to a beautiful village where you start to realize that something is really wrong. So you begin to try to figure out what has happened. You then have to survive a Lycan invasion, which I think was a pretty good start to introduce you to combat and to some of the enemies, and to realize that this is not going to be your RE7 slow, scary survival horror style game. Soon after you meet the villains of the story, along with the main villain, Mother Miranda, it can all still be considered the intro up until this point. Then you come to Castle Dimitrescu, and this is the first significant part of the game. In the castle, you have to find key items, learn more about what's happening, solve a couple of really simple puzzles, and fight the 3 sisters, or Lady Dimitrescu's 3 daughters. And those 3 sisters, I think, are great mini bosses in this game. And you get real Resident Evil 1 vibes from this castle, and feel like this could be like the new Spencer Mansion. And while you did see Lady Dimitrescu not too long before this, you're now properly introduced to what many consider to be the best boss in the game. When you first get to the castle, you think that maybe Rose has been taken to this castle, but you soon find out that she isn't, and you just have to escape while Lady D and her daughters try to stop you. While the stalker thing is getting a little bit played out, mostly because there is no variety. They just walk around and you run from them. I think she was way more popular than they thought she would be, because she doesn't stick around for a whole lot of the game, just maybe the first hour or so. I think that we should have maybe fought her like kind of like Jack, to where he showed up later in the game as well, or a few times throughout the game, I guess you could say. But that isn't the end of the world, but just a missed opportunity, I feel like. The castle was pretty amazing, even if a little simplistic, but there's a lot more to the game, so the castle isn't everything. After defeating the mutated Lady D, we find a flask that becomes the main key items we are looking for, because they're actually Rose split apart Rose's essence. So for the next flask, we have to head to House Beneviento, where let's just say it wasn't that great. The baby was cool and freaky the first playthrough, but after that, it really wasn't. The puzzles were okay and better than the puzzles in the castle where you had to find the 4 masks, shoot 4 bells, etc. But there was only a couple, and the puzzles remain exactly the same in all difficulties in all playthroughs of the game. So after you know the solution, the replayability can quickly become an annoyance. The boss fight is just a gimmick. It isn't hard, and it's not very fun. You just chase around the little doll, stab her with some scissors a couple times, and then that's it. The whole level takes way less than an hour, even in your first playthrough. For me, it did anyway, but I know that could vary for each player. So you get through what I feel like is a big missed opportunity with House Beneviento. It could have had some real creepy Amityville horror elements inside the house, but it just wasn't that great. Next, we leave and we go meet Moreau. Moreau is pretty cool in a pathetic sort of way.
Mother Miranda, if it's for you, I'd do anything.
I'll just be taking this.
Wait. What are you doing with Mother's special child?
She's not hers.
His level, however, is really lacking. You run, grab a crank, come back, crank something, while he tries to knock you off the platforms into the water. But after the first time, it's extremely easy to run through in your subsequent playthroughs. But his boss fight, I think, is pretty cool. I think he's a really good boss. Maybe one of the best in the game, or the best, but definitely in the conversation. Not that there's a whole lot to choose from, but he's a lot better than the previous boss was for sure. And that is until you get to Village of Shadows difficulty, and it just becomes ridiculous. 60 shotgun rounds, 10 mines, some grenade launcher grenades, and then some is a little bit too much. And after you defeat Moreau, then you're going to go to the Lycans lair, which the Lycans are who we met from the beginning of the game where we had to survive the Lycans invasion. So it's pretty cool to get to go see their area. And I can forgive it being short, I guess, because you might not expect them to have much complexity, but the level is still pretty short, relatively short. I mean, really short. You can run through the whole level to get to the end in 10-15 minutes really easily. And if you're playing on harder difficulties, killing the enemies is just not an option. You have to just figure out a way to run around them. And you get to the end and you're going to run back into Urias, who you met from the beginning of the Lycan invasion as well. He's a big old Lycan. His boss fight's pretty good. I don't have a problem with the way it's set up. But like with everything, once you get to Village of Shadows, you're running through the Lycan lair, ignoring enemies. Then you have to shoot the boss 3 million times, trying not to get hit, because one hit and you're down to 1 HP. And you can't afford to use the 25 rounds of ammo it takes to kill a normal enemy. So, like everything, Village of Shadows just not fun. It's not a fun boss for me or a fun area. And after you defeat Urias, you get to find the 4th flask. Now you can go back to where the main hub is in the area, put the 4th flask in, and it takes you, like I said, miraculously to Heisenberg for some reason. Now the factory level is actually a decent level on the same wavelength as the castle. There's actually parts to the factory that you have to do. It's not just a simple run through, grab a crank, run through, do this. There's none of that. So the factory's actually a pretty cool level. And it also introduced you to a bunch of new enemies in the game that are a lot different than the other enemies from most of the RE series. After you make it through the factory, you get to do the Heisenberg boss fight, and while being, I think, pretty graphically amazing, It was more of a gimmick fight that gives you a mini tank that you use, kind of Call of Duty style. And for an RE game, this was definitely different, and I do give Capcom credit for trying to change up the formula a little bit and trying something new. It didn't suck completely, so let's just say it wasn't completely crappy. It was okay. But then after defeating Heisenberg, we get to switch characters in the middle of the game, which has kind of become a thing that RE does. And we get to play Chris Redfield, which I'm sure most original Resident Evil fans was pretty thrilled about getting to play Chris. And the level is just a continuation of the Call of Duty style play that we used in the Heisenberg fight. You got a machine gun, pistol, grenades, flash grenades, but I actually don't mind that here because Chris is a soldier who's been fighting these bioweapons for 20 years. He's came there prepared. He wasn't dropped in, so he should have all of these things. Now, we could argue about the whole laser-guided missile thing. I don't think that's too outrageous, but it is, maybe on the verge. And I have seen a lot of people say that they didn't like this section, but I actually did enjoy it. And it is, once again, though, short. It's a short area. And you go through, and then you got to fight a boss who's basically Urias again, but with some armor. And you got to shoot him in his back and drop missiles down on them and everything else. But it was okay. It was an okay fight, so it was kind of cool. And once you finish with Chris, you actually, find the Megamycete, which is the main thing that's causing all this stuff in the village. And we also find that Mia is still alive, which does fill in on some of the story. So all in all, I think the Chris section was pretty good, just like with a lot of the things, just really short. Then we get to take back control of Ethan, who was subsequently murdered by Miranda after us defeating Heisenberg. But we find out that Ethan is not all that he seemed. He was actually killed and infected with the mold since Dolby, which is a shock, but it does explain a lot and shows how he could get through some of these injuries. But it was kind of unbelievable as well. And it also lets us know that's why Miranda wants Rose in the first place, because we find out she is also infected. And so she needs Rose to bring back her daughter, which is the whole reason that she got into doing stuff like, with the Megamycete and everything in the first place, and why the four lords were made in the village was to try to take her daughter's spirit or whatever to recreate her daughter. And she thought Rose could survive that because Rose was special. And I honestly thought that Resident Evil 9 would be about Rose, but Capcom is making DLC, which I feel like is cooler because we could just get this story over with, move on to something else. I liked Ethan, and I thought he was a great protagonist, and maybe he isn't dead, but if he is dead, it's time to just move on to something else, in my opinion. But at last, we have the Miranda fight. And it's actually a really good fight. And maybe, like I said, being the actual best boss fight in the game with Moreau and her, I think, vie for that. Because Lady D, while being a great character, I don't feel like her boss fight was quite as on par with what it was kind of led up for us to do. So it was okay. And she's definitely in the top 3, but there's, only a handful after that. You got, obviously, Donna Beneviento being at the back end. Then you got Heisenberg. And then I would go with Lady D, and then Moreau, and probably Mother Miranda as the boss order. But like with everything else, man, once you get on Village of Shadows, then it's just ridiculous. She's going to smash you. You got to shoot her 1,000,000 times. It's a little bit too much. But if you go to hardcore, she's hard but fair, which is good enough for me, which is all I ask for in a boss or enemy in a game. Hard but fair. Now, that is a lot wrong with the Village. But all in all, I think it is a good game. And I think it is worth the $40 price that it is now, or maybe even a little cheaper. While I'm not mad that I spent the $60 on it, I do think it is too much for it. The graphics in this game are amazing, and I do like that they are adding a third-person option in the DLC because that is my preferred way of playing Resident Evil games. And it's the best of both worlds, considering that some people might prefer first person, some people might prefer third. So now we all can get our cake and eat it too. Hopefully the DLC story, Shadows of Rose, is pretty long and not just an RE7 DLC story like the End of Zoe or Not a Hero DLC. They were okay and they were just not very long, but we did get multiple of them. So hopefully the Shadows of Rose will make up for that by being kind of long, giving us some good story and giving us some good gameplay. The mercenary add-ons with being able to play Chris Redfield, Lady Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, I could honestly care less about that, but it doesn't mean it won't be a good addition or others may not be looking forward to them. Now, I don't know why Capcom thinks like RE fans want a multiplayer shooter style Resident Evil game, because I don't think the majority of them do. You know, maybe they're trying to make money, so they're trying to like get into that market to get more people playing, which is totally fine as long as they don't completely abandon their original RE games that got people into the game in the first place. You know, you could do whatever you want, try to make money. For me personally, I just don't think that it's, you know, going to be good for me. Let's just leave it at that. Now, with all that said, I like I said, the third person, cool. Shadows of Rose, cool. And it does, but it's going to cost you an extra $20 to get all of this. And I can understand why that may seem like a little ridiculous to some people, considering I spent $60 for the game and will now add on $20 on top of that for a total of $80. And while giving me the ability to play Ethan third person will make me play the game again, but I can easily run through the whole game in 2 hours. So it's not going to be much different. It's just going to give me a different point of view. If we figure that the Shadows of Rose DLC will give me a couple more hours, hopefully, and it's not something that's just like 30, 40 minutes long, and doing the new Mercenaries that I will do just for the achievements will give me a few more hours, I guess $20 isn't all that bad. But as a whole, for $80, the total time in this game, I feel like is lacking. And not just the story. When I say total time, I don't mean just because the story isn't long enough. I just mean because you factor in replayability and everything else, it's lacking. And when I talk about total time in a game, I don't just want time. Okay? I want to have quality time in a game. And it doesn't necessarily have to be long for me to enjoy the game, but it does have to keep me playing for a while I enjoy playing the game. And I asked myself if I only like this game because it's a Resident Evil game. And I think that's probably true up to a point. I know if I bought any other game for $60 and I got 5 hours out of it, I would be pissed off. Especially if the replayability is not there. But hopefully we can get a little more in the future. Now, I would recommend this game if you're okay with the problems I discussed, obviously, and especially if you're a Resident Evil fan, and especially for the $40 that it is now. I don't feel like that's a totally unfair price for the game. But once you tack on the $20 DLC, I guess you'll have to see if it's worth a total of $60 for you, or you could wait. Games always go on sale, but I'm not completely upset that I even spent $80 on it, but I think, like I said, that has a lot to do with just me being a Resident Evil fan. Anyway, that's all I got for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up. If you didn't, then hit a thumbs down. And if you haven't subscribe to the channel, as I'm going to be doing more game reviews, gameplay, and more, so smash that red subscribe button below. Take it easy.
How about this? I will take that!